All right. I read an interesting article in the Associated Press, and the article states that the Kentucky GOP lawmakers override governor and undo efforts to prevent renter discrimination. What does that mean? Okay, so there was a new law that was written in Kentucky that was vetoed and then overridden. So a new law has passed in Kentucky that would affect renters who use federal housing vouchers, which are like coupons from the government to help people pay for rent. This is for low income people, people with disabilities, veterans, things of that nature. Okay, so the law would affect these people. They overrode the governor's veto of this law. The law was passed, even though the governor of Kentucky, Andy Beshear, didn't agree with it and tried to stop it. But the lawmakers in Kentucky, who are mostly from the Republican Party, decided to go ahead with the law anyway, and they overrode his veto. So he tried to stop it. They overrode it. It's now law. Here's the governor's concern. The governor Beshear was worried about this law because he thought it took away local control over housing issues. He also pointed out the law also says local governments can't stop landlords from refusing to rent to people who use federal assistance, vouchers, Section 8, to pay rent, which would be a discrimination against federal assistance user. The laws will allow landlords to refuse to rent to people who use Section 8. This would affect veterans, people with disability, the elderly, and the low income, who often rely on these programs. So there's a typical push of certain think tanks and right-wing conservative institutions push this idea of welfare being a bad thing. Now, why don't people just pull up their bootstraps and do it themselves? Well, you have several factors of reasons of why people can't just pull up their bootstraps. Martin Luther King, and I'm paraphrasing his quote, once said, "It is very tough for a person to pull up their bootstraps when they have no boots." So that, once again, going back to the previous segment, the federal government is there to help people. So in one way is that they help people with disabilities, low income, elderly, and veterans. Let's make it clear. This also helps veterans, the people that go and fight for your freedoms. They help people pay for housing, Section 8. It's a part of a welfare system. And a lot of people push this idea that it's just black and brown people, it's just poor people want to pull themselves by the bootstraps. And like I said, it's very tough to pull yourself up by the bootstraps when you have no boots, right? So this law basically will allow people who rent out their houses, rent out their apartments, to refuse people that get Section 8, that get these vouchers. I feel like this is a federal discrimination that the state can't do. And there might be a lawsuit, and it might work its way up through the courts, because this will absolutely lead to discrimination. Because a lot of people that have welfare, okay, this is a poor analogy, but I'm going to try and get the audience out there, the people that's watching and listening, to think of it in these terms. I live in the Washington, D.C. area. There is a lot of homeless, unhoused in this area. People walk every day right past these people as if they're invisible. And if you ever talk to an unhoused person, they'll say, we feel invisible until we are being harassed for being where we are and who we are. Okay? Most people walk past them, don't give them a second thought. A lot of people, and I've known some people, will look negatively, look down upon them, I know one person once said that this unhoused person came to them in New York City and asked them for some money to grab some cocoa or something like that because it was a cold day. And she said, "Why don't you go get a job?" That's when I realized me and this person were never going to be friends. Actually, they were a client, and I shortly but shortly but surely fired them afterwards because they were just a really horrible person. But there are a lot of people out there that look at homeless like that. Here's where the poor analogy comes in, but an analogy that maybe you can understand. A lot of times, people who are on welfare that are in these Section 8 housings are looked at negatively as dirty or poor. They are poor, but they're not dirty. I know people. I My family was on welfare. My parents were on welfare in the beginning when I came into this world. Right now, they got plenty of money, but they needed welfare to help them. Sometimes people need help. Nobody says anything about all the help that people received during the Great Depression. People were out there struggling, and there were food kitchens and there were housing situations to help people through the rough time. Why is it that the people, the so-called greatest generation that went through that Great Depression, aren't looked at negatively for getting handouts? Rightfully so, because they're going through a tough time. But poor people now getting handouts is looked at negatively. So this law being passed in Kentucky is going to open up the door for landlords to say, you know what? I don't want your type of people in my place. Before, that was discriminatory. You could not do that. Now you can. And what's going to happen is there are going to be a lot of people who are disabled, who are people of color, who are elderly, who are veterans that are going to be denied housing. The governor also doesn't like the removal of local control. So the law will remove local control over housing issues. This means that local governments can't stop landlords from refusing to rent to people who use federal assistance. So there will be no safeguards. There will be no checks and balances. Landlords will be able to pick and choose who they want to live in their place, not the best person, just not necessarily the best person, just the person that they would prefer to rent to. This can potentially increase the housing crisis that already exists, because critics of the law have expressed concerns that it could worsen the housing crisis that's in Kentucky because they have a really bad housing crisis if landlords refuse to rent to people who are using federal assistance, because these individuals may struggle to find other forms of affordable housing. And they are in This is happening in two of the most populated cities in Kentucky, Louisville and Lexington. For example, Louisville and Lexington had ordinances that banned landlords from refusing to rent to someone just because they wanted to use a Section 8 voucher or receive other types of government assistance. This law will now take that away in two of the major areas. And so to not just be a person that's one side, I'm going to give you the other point of view. People who support this say that the people who support this law, like Republican Rep Ryan Dotson, said that the law was meant to protect landlords' rights to do what they want with their property. They argued that the law wasn't discriminatory. Hold on. I'm going to combat that argument. To do what they want with their property? In what way? If you are allowed, if you open up your property to be rented to the public, you should not be allowed to discriminate against anybody for any particular reasons. Right? If you say this is the rent, everybody is willing to pay that rent, they can pay the rent. You shouldn't be able to discriminate who can live in your place and who cannot live in your place based off of what factors? Personal factors? This is not a situation where you're giving property owners their rights in order, like for instance, they can build a basement, or they can change the doors, or they can put whatever windows up. That's not what this is talking about. This is saying I can pick and choose who I want to live in my house, which in some regards I completely understand. But if you open the rental process up to people, to the public, and you don't say, yeah, I'm going to rent this to a family member or whatever. If you open it up to the people, if you put it in the classifieds, right? Or I don't even think that tells you how old I am. If you like that clip, go ahead and hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe to catch up on all of our latest content. Don't forget to hit the notification button when you do subscribe so you can get updated every time we release content. We release content every day, whether it's an actual show or clips from the shows. So go ahead and subscribe, like, comment. Also, don't forget our Patreon page where you can find our Talking Straight-ish and After Hours Uncensored episodes. That's patreon.com/unsolicited perspectives. But once again, thank you again for listening to Unsolicited Perspectives. I'm your host, Bruce Anthony, and I'm going to catch you next time. I'll holla.